This is the story of Berend Borst, a Dutch veteran. This is his experience of the German invasion of the Netherlands. He was stationed near the Hague, where the Dutch government resides. There is also an airport nearby. Let's begin. It was springtime, and the May sun caused the young greenery to bloom. The flower bulb fields unfolded again in their full splendor. But not everywhere was it so calm and peaceful, as the war between the Allies and Germany had now lasted for 8 months without decisive battles taking place. There were regular incidents at the French Maginot Line and the German Siegfried Line, and Germany made forays into other countries, but a definitive victory for the warring nations had not yet occurred. How much longer would the Dutch army need to remain mobilized? Sooner than we had thought, an end came, but in a way we had not dared to imagine. Friday, May 10th. We will never forget this date. The day the German army invaded our country by land and air, dragging the Netherlands into the war. Like most military personnel and civilians in our country, we too were awakened by the heavy drone of many airplanes. Everyone in our room was soon out of bed. We didn't know what was happening. We suspected there was a flying exercise or a serious violation of neutrality by some warring power. But as we saw the planes flying lower and lower through the high barracks windows, we recognized them as German machines. We now thought that Germany was attacking England. One of the boys turned on the radio, and then we heard what we hadn't considered for a moment: the Netherlands was at war. Germany had unexpectedly attacked our country without a declaration of war. Through the airwaves came the chilling voice of the announcer: German planes were spotted everywhere, parachutists had landed, planes were landing in various places, large troops were crossing the border and entering our country. Parachutists had been dropped in Dutch uniforms. What were we to make of all this? War in the Netherlands. Now the Royal Netherlands Army had to confront a much larger adversary. What would be the outcome of that? Were we prepared to face the greater invader? What now of us recruits? How would the soldiers at the border fare? What about Danny, my brother, who had been in Gramsbergen in such peaceful mobilization that was now suddenly at an end? What would happen at home? Many questions raced through my mind, but I received no answers. From one of the guards who was in the room, we learned that airplanes had been flying over Leiden since about 3 o'clock in the morning. Parachutists had landed at Hague, Schouw, about 5 kilometers from Leiden. The war looked serious right away. We quickly got dressed. Everyone expressed their opinion on the situation, of which we didn't yet know the full extent. Hoop Heasterman, who was 2 bunks away from me, put on his best uniform, saying, "If this uniform gets destroyed, I'll get a new one from the quartermaster." He would never need new clothes. It was around 5 o'clock when we stood in the courtyard. Reveille hadn't even been sounded yet. During roll call, it was officially announced to us that the Netherlands was at war with Germany. Nothing else was communicated, but we were instructed to dress in full field clothing. We went to our rooms to get our helmets, gas masks, bread bags with bread, and belts with ammunition pouches. While dressing, we heard one of the sergeants firing his rifle at the airplanes. Once we were ready, we went to the courtyard to receive 45 rounds of ammunition. The rifles were loaded, and the safety catch was set to safe. Then we had to await further orders. While waiting, we stood in front of the barracks to see what was happening, and if there was any news. Civilians were gathered in groups talking, or passing by on foot or bicycle. A nervous atmosphere pervaded among the people. A lady informed us from a window above that the radio had announced that the English and French were our allies. It's a pity that during the war days, we experienced so little of that. We aimlessly wandered around, the airplanes capturing our full attention. They were all German aircraft, we didn't see a single Dutch or other plane. We were told that a German aircraft had been shot down near Hague. A group of infantrymen, 2 Dep.Inf, marched along Nordend towards Hague. They were split into 2 long lines hugging the houses closely due to the danger from the air. Finally, we were instructed to fill oat sacks with sand. These were used to create barriers on both sides of the barracks on Nordend. Old cannons, which had been on display in our courtyard, and several iron bunks, a cart, etc., were used for this purpose. The sacks were filled in the outdoor arena, located on the grounds of the Doolan barracks near the stables. We were still wearing our full gear while filling the sacks, which was quite cumbersome as the sacks became quite heavy. They had to be loaded onto a cart to be taken to the barriers. During this work, something noteworthy happened. On the other side of the canal, a white motorboat was moored. We all knew this boat well as it had been there all winter. A corporal and a soldier arrived at this boat, riding together on a motorcycle. The soldier set the motorboat in motion and sailed past us. We noticed this and shouted to the soldier, but he gave no response. We didn't pay much attention. Shortly after, Major Weller and an adjutant hurriedly approached. The major instructed us to follow him with our rifles. We all did, as we had rifles with us. While walking, we wondered what could be happening. We followed the major along the infirmary until we reached the manure heap. There, we were to take cover. The major then informed us that a German in Dutch uniform had sailed up the canal in a motorboat. We mentioned that we had seen him, but didn't know he was a German soldier who had entered the city of Leiden in such a treacherous manner. Our wait was soon rewarded as the motorboat returned with the soldier still aboard. We waited anxiously until we could restrain him. The motorboat approached, but it turned out that the police were already aware of the intruder because an officer incapacitated the spy with revolver shots to the arm and neck, which were not fatal. The brave men who defended Leiden against the Spanish in 1574 would have never imagined that on May 10, 1940, on the first day of this war, the enemy had entered the old key city in such a treacherous way. After this incident, we continued with the barricades. We made them as well as we could. The atmosphere became increasingly tense because we didn't know what to expect, especially now that we had encountered a German soldier, even if he was in Dutch uniform, proof that the enemy was not far away. It was around 7:30 when a truck drove into the courtyard of the barracks. A crate of ammunition was loaded into it. This had to be taken to Katwijk aan Zee. 12 boys were selected to accompany the truck to guard the ammunition, and I was among them. We saw this car ride as a great opportunity to see what was happening outside of Leiden. That's why some boys volunteered to come along. Under the command of Corporal Kortman, the service car with 15 boys and the driver left the barracks, but we never reached our destination. I remember the names of most of the boys in the car, but in this story, I'll mainly refer to them as friends. As we approached Katwijk, we crossed the bridge over the Old Rhine. There was also a checkpoint there in Dutch uniform. Once again, we had to stop before continuing at full speed. Half a kilometer further, we were stopped again, but this time by German soldiers. The driver and the corporal, who was seated in the front, were not prepared for this. We in the back had no inkling that we would encounter Germans on our way. Suddenly, the car stopped again. We heard voices, as usual at checkpoints, so we didn't notice the Germans at first and patiently waited for the car to continue. But suddenly, 2 Germans were behind the car with their weapons ready. Upon seeing armed soldiers, they fired a shot at us, causing us to quickly jump aside. Fortunately, no one was hit, but this unexpected attack left us shaken. We quickly recovered, and most of us cocked our rifles so we could shoot immediately. Tense moments passed as we waited, unsure of what would happen next. How many Germans were we up against? Were there more than just those 2? Anxious moments went by. Next to the car, we heard talking, and finally, our corporal emerged from behind the car. He told us to surrender, otherwise, he and the driver were in danger of being shot. We had no choice but to obey. We didn't know how many enemy soldiers there were, and behind the canvas, we had no cover. So we climbed out of the car, upon which the 2 German soldiers approached us again. On the orders of the German soldiers, the rifles were left in the car. There we stood, defeated. We were now prisoners of war. Friday morning, May 10th, around 8:15. We were near the tram bridge, with the Katwijk lime factory on the left and a monastery on the right. We were ordered to remove our equipment and place it together. There lay our helmets, rifles, gas masks, belts, and bread bags. What went through our minds at that moment is indescribable. After crossing the tram bridge, we were joined by 8 corporals from the instruction battery of the 5th Field Artillery Regiment. But there we also encountered more soldiers, namely a number of German soldiers. It became clear to us that surrendering without a fight was the right thing to do. Resistance would have cost us dearly. We were lined up in a column and had to march under German escort. It was hopeless, we were completely discouraged, and besides, we had to walk with our hands up. But that was so tiring that we eventually lowered them behind our heads, which was easier. I'll never forget that journey. What I saw immediately gave the impression of what war truly was. We went straight through the village of Valkenburg. We didn't see any civilians, it seemed as though they had fled. There were only many German soldiers. Several houses had broken windows and kicked in doors. These were clear signs of resistance and destruction. You could tell from everything that the inhabitants of Valkenburg had not had a pleasant morning. We also saw some wounded German soldiers, and there was even a dead German soldier lying beside the road. Some of us had to take him away. There were motorcycles with sidecars from the German army, and the Germans also drove cars, which probably came from Valkenburg, because the Dutch license plate had the province letter H. These cars, including some luxurious ones, were covered in large swastikas. We wondered why there were so many Germans. Where did they all come from? Everywhere we looked, we saw them. They wore identical uniforms. Later, we found out that they were infantrymen from the German army. So, the parachutists or pilots we saw here were none other than regular infantrymen. How did they arrive in Valkenburg so early? Completely behind the waterline. Later, we learned that they had entered our country with Rhine barges and had hidden in the Katwijk lime factory, KKF, and in the barges. It couldn't have been more treacherous. The Germans were present in large numbers. I estimated the number to be at least 1,000 men. Everything indicated that the attack on the Netherlands was a meticulously planned operation. It has become clear that even Dutch people were complicit in this cowardly and treacherous invasion by the Germans. That is a dark chapter in our greatest national history. After passing through Valkenburg, we continued, still unaware of the destination the Germans were taking us to. This concludes the first part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of these first days of the war for the Netherlands? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.